No suspension for LeBron James. Is it perceived preferential treatment? We talk about that and more coming up. Ice Trey, aka Trey Young, is he the new villain in the NYC? And say it ain't so. Julio Jones says he's ready to go from the ATL, that is. We talk about that and more coming up right here on Fourth and Just Us. Welcome to Fourth and Just Us, everyone. I'm so glad that you all could join us again. Lericia Harris here alongside Kevin, the former athletic director, Anderson himself, as well as the professor, Dr. Leonard Moore. We welcome you to our show, another Wednesday where we have some great information lined up for you. The topic of today's show, the question we're posing is, does the NFL have a race problem? We're going to talk about that, and we'll be joined by our very special guest, who is actually the Director of Football Affairs for the Los Angeles Rams, Mr. Jacques McClendon. He'll join us later in the show. But wherever you are, don't forget that if you're watching us on Facebook, remember to like us there, subscribe to our page on YouTube if you're watching us on YouTube, and also drop those questions, those comments, your concerns as we are going throughout the show. We want to hear from you. So if there are any questions, of course, put them in the chat wherever you're watching, and we will get to them when time permits. But we want to get straight into the discussion. One of the first current event topics we want to discuss today is LeBron James. We know that the NBA announced that he would not receive a suspension after he did not, he didn't have to quarantine after attending his tequila event. And he briefly attended an outdoor event. And the NBA, the spokesperson, Mike Bass, released a statement on Monday saying that LeBron James briefly attended this outdoor event where participants were required to be vaccinated or return a negative test result. And under these circumstances, and in any consultation with medical experts, it was determined that his attendance did not create risk related to the spread of COVID-19, and therefore no quarantine was necessary. So I'm posing a question to you all, guys. Is this perceived preferential treatment for LeBron James? AD?
Yes. And I think the league's looking at this too, that, when there is so much money at stake, you're going to treat most people fair, but not the same. And there's no way going into the playoffs that the NBA is going to have him sit out a week to 10 days when we're deeming it's not necessary anymore, and when all these stadiums are going to full capacity. You look at, now he did help Porzingis with the Dallas Mavericks, because I'm sure he would have been not only fined like he was for $50,000, but he would have had to sit out as well. So, I mean, they're looking at this where they know where their bread is buttered. So I think that you have to do what's right for the league.
Let me say this, Lericia. The NBA has been milking LeBron for a long time. And if you look at how, so when LeBron exits stage left, whenever that is, who is the next superstar in many ways that fills that spotlight? And if I'm David Stern, if I'm the owners, if I'm in New York City at the league office, that's what's keeping me up at night. LeBron drives ratings, and he is perfect because half the people like him, half the people hate him. But guess what? Everybody watches him. So it's just one. I mean, is it Durant? Is it Harden? Is it Kyrie? Is it Steph Curry? So who is the next person going to step into that spotlight to keep the ratings up? Because I'll say this, there are about 16, 17 NBA teams now. I can't even tell you one player on a bunch of those teams, And so I think LeBron keeps the interest collectively in the NBA. But once he departs from the scene, boy, it'll be interesting to see how that NBA marketing machine tries to create, in many ways, another LeBron.
So I'm looking at this as it is different times in the pandemic, correct? We know that we saw similar sort of situations happen. Take it, Lou Williams. this was actually during the time when they had the bubble in place down in Orlando, but Lou Williams, he had to sit out quarantine because he went to a place that wasn't, that was restricted at the time. But do you think that because we are in a different position as it pertains to the pandemic, that this is maybe what played a role in them not suspending him at all, Doc?
Perhaps, without a doubt. And that leads to this other issue, Lericia, about LeBron and the vaccine. Is it his family business, whether he's gotten it or not? Absolutely his family business. But to me, when you are a celebrity, you can't play this game of in and out. You want to be in on some things. You want to use your voice on some things, but some other things you don't want to use your voice. And so I think that's the bigger issue. Is LeBron vaccinated? If he's not vaccinated, then maybe why not?
So you're saying that he should tell people whether or not he's vaccinated because he has not disclosed whether he received the COVID-19 vaccination. You're saying that he should. If you're going to embrace this role of change agent and all of that, I think you got to be all in or out, all out. Now, does he have a right not to say anything? Absolutely. But I think just be all in or all out. You can't have opinions on everything else, then on this one say, well, it's private. And it's like, well, come on, bruh. He's never been one to hold his tongue. He always enjoys speaking his mind. And I think that's many ways why we are drawn to him. AD?
I would agree with Leonard that we need to be consistent, and he needs to be consistent. And so, yeah, if you're all in, you're all in. And if you're not, very difficult, someone in his position to pick and choose what he wants to in this role. And that's not a sign of a true leader. So true leaders going to take on whatever's presented in front of him and express his feelings or her feelings and why they think the way they do. So I think that's what he needs to consider.
I totally understand what you all are saying about him being consistent and not picking and choosing. I think what might have caused this is his response to that particular question when it was asked to him when he said it's not a big deal. Is that why you all are saying that? Because he should have handled it differently? Because I do agree that he should have handled it differently.
Yeah, we understand the Tuskegee experiment. We understand medical apartheid. We understand that when the first medical schools were created in the U.S., what they used for cadavers, they went to black cemeteries and stole bodies out of the ground. And we understand all the experimentation that's gone on, black people in this country. But the challenge is, Lericia, is that this COVID-19 killed a whole bunch of black folks. It disproportionately affected black people. And what I've been telling people, if you're worried about the vaccine and what they do to black folk, you know what? This ain't no plaything. This shot can keep many of us alive. And I think that's the issue why he said, it's not a big deal. I think it really is a big deal, particularly those of us who have lost loved ones during the pandemic.
I totally agree with you. I believe he should have definitely handled it differently when he was asked that question. Like you said, he does have the right to not disclose that information, especially if it's something personal, whether he is for it or against it. That is totally okay. But I think if maybe he would have just approached that question in a totally different way, then we would not see, the stories that we see about him, some of the opinionated stories or just some of the other responses that people have given as it pertains to, him in this particular COVID situation, especially when you guys give it from the perspective that he can't pick and choose, what he wants to use his voice for. I think if he would have come out and basically, said that he's noticed, that there's been a disproportionate number of African Americans who have suffered from this, I think that would not be him picking and choosing. And it also still does not reveal, his personal perspective as it pertains to the vaccine. But regardless, he wasn't suspended. And we know that a former NBA legend himself, Charles Barkley, came out and said the NBA ain't got the balls to suspend him. Do you all agree with the statements of Charles Barkley, AD?
I don't know if balls is what I'll use, but I think they used some discretion in what they were doing, and they understood, who is important to the entity at hand, and they made that choice accordingly. The other thing is, if I'm Porzingis, I'm sending a LeBron whatever tequila he likes to drink, because he would have been sitting out had LeBron not been in this situation. Just cost him $50,000. I'm not sure. Did they fine LeBron?
Not that we know of.
I don't think so.
Not
Well,
that
if
we
I'm
know of.
Porzingis, then I'm still going to be a little pissed off because it cost me $50,000. It didn't cost him anything. But membership has its privileges.
And Lericia, if LeBron ain't playing, I'm not watching the playoffs, because the whole point of watching the playoffs is who's going to play the Lakers in the finals. You know what I mean? I mean, if LeBron's not in it, you know, the Clippers, Dallas, that's none of those. To me, to be the playoffs are meaningless if LeBron James ain't playing.
Well, I'm just letting you know right now, the Lakers suck and they are not looking good. So we shall see what happens. Moving on right now, there is a team that has been bringing some spark to the playoffs in round one. And there's a particular player, Ice Trae, a.k.a. Trae Young of the Atlanta Hawks. Is he the new NYC villain? We know that during the first game, the Knicks sort of serenaded Trae Young at Madison Square Garden, you know, with the chant saying, F you, Trae Young, that sort of thing. And Trae Young came back and was like, shh, it's kind of quiet in here now. And he hit the game-winning buzzer. He hit the game-winning shot, rather. And he also finished with 32 points and I believe 10 assists. Is Trae Young the new NYC villain? And I ask this because of what we saw at Madison Square Garden. And also, is this reminiscent of the Reggie Miller sort of, you know, tie there back in the 1990s, Doc?
No, those Knicks were good with my homeboy from Cleveland, Oakley, Starks. They could ball. I tell people, you know, my son's like, Daddy, what's the big deal with the New York Knicks? I said, I'm 49 years old, and I still haven't figured it out. Most people know the Knicks not by a player, but by their biggest fan, the filmmaker Spike Lee. He is known as the New York Knicks guy. So I think if the Knicks fans are going to call Trae Young a villain, I think the Knicks need to be a little bit more competitive. They weren't even good this year. And understand this, in the NBA, particularly with the play-in, everybody makes the playoffs. So Knicks fans, let's win a couple more years before y'all start talking about Trae Young as a villain.
AD?
Yeah, I got to put some thought. So Reggie Miller was a villain. Reggie loved playing the villain. What do you call him? Trae Cube? Trae, what do you?
Ice Trae.
Ice Trae. I'm sorry. Yeah, because I was lost for a minute because I was trying to look up and see, you know, what kind of record he had cut. Anyway, he's too nice a kid to be a villain. You know, he got caught up in the moment. Yeah. I mean, look at him. He looks like everybody's little brother. Put your arm around him, hug him, squeeze him a little bit. Now, you know, I mean, boy can shoot, but I don't think he has that villainous trait and that they're going to make him villain because, I mean, he's just not that New York cutout kind of person to be their kind of villain. I could go back. The last time the Knicks were good, Doc, when they had Willis Reed and Walt Frazier and Willis Reed
limping in the stadium, couldn't even walk.
Absolutely.
That far? You guys are going that far? That far? Go ahead, AD.
No, I'm through.
Well, I think Trae Young likes it because he's been overlooked for the past couple years in the NBA. That dude has been killing it. I think he got snubbed from the All-Star game this year. I could be wrong, but that dude has been killing it.
He's 22 years old, and I read an article that is his dad spoke in, and basically his dad was like, you know, he likes to take on when people sort of underestimate him and when people, you know, come at him with all these different sort of chants and things trying to discourage him. He takes that in and he uses that as motivation, and I think that's what happened in this first game. Now, will it be easy for the Hawks tonight? I'm not sure. Because they've seen him, they've been up against the Hawks now. They know what Trae Young can do. So we shall see. That game is currently underway right now. Game 2 of this first round playoff battle going on. That game 2 again happening right now between the Knicks and the Hawks, and we are definitely going to stay updated and into that game to see what happens, to see if the Knicks can bounce back from that 107-105 loss in the first game. Moving on now, Olympian Lee Evans. He unfortunately, this is the Olympian who raised his fists on the medal stand back in 1968. He died at the age of 74 in Nigeria. When you think about his legacy and what he meant to the sports world, what comes to mind for you, Doc?
I think he was of that, generation of African-American athletes, Lericia, who really understood racial justice. A lot of them, their careers suffered for it. He participated in the protests in Mexico City in 1968. But the one unfortunate thing, Lericia, if we can make a parallel to today, is that I think the Black community, when it comes to social justice and fighting racism, I think we put way too much pressure on athletes. And I think, these brothers and sisters, what they did in 68 sort of set a pattern. But here we are almost 54 years later and doing the same thing. Whenever there's an issue, the first thing we can't say is get the athletes to protest. Like the University of North Carolina, when they denied Nicole Hannah-Jones, the New York Times reporter, when they denied her tenure at North Carolina. I mean, it was a travesty. It was racially and politically motivated. The people in Carolina were saying, well, let's get the athletes to protest. Let's get them to boycott. Those people, they're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. And so I appreciate that generation, Lee Evans, John Carlos, Tommy Smith, and so many others. But I think we have to evolve, look at them for inspiration. But I think the Black middle class needs to step up and quit looking at 20 and 21-year-olds to get them to make some kind of statement and as a way to galvanize a response.
But Doc, it goes back to what we've been talking about, that the student athletes, once they return to campus and with all this social activism that we've seen, I think it's going to be a new day, and that I don't know if all these campuses are prepared. Lee Evans was the co-founder of the Olympic Project for Human Rights. So nobody came to them. It was the athletes who formed what they were going to do and how they were going to present themselves at the Olympics. The other thing that we need to talk about, he won 2 gold medals and he broke the world record. So, I mean, this brother was not only a great athlete, but he was, a leader, and he, helped get together this activism that changed the world, not only America, but changed the world and changed the Olympics.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And again, we honor the life and legacy of Olympian Lee Evans, who again supported the Black Power movement by rocking his black beret and putting up his fists in the air. Moving to another young lady who is making history and has already solidified her name in the record books. And she is truly the GOAT, especially after she rocked the sparkled diamond figured goat on the back of her leotard during her recent competition. Simone Biles, man, this woman here, this lady here, she proved she was a GOAT, as she was the first woman to land the Yurchenko double pike vault. When I saw it, I was taken aback by it, and I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. Doc, when you saw this particular instance, when you saw her do this, what were your immediate thoughts?
Lericia, I just thought about all the Black girls who are gymnasts. I remember when my daughter was in gymnastics, and I would take her to these gyms. She the only Black girl in there. The only Black girl in there. Austin, Houston, Dallas may have a couple, but for the most part, and I know it had to be lonely, but Simone Biles killing it, it just proves, and I've been saying this for 20-something years, when the playing field is level and we have equal access, we will completely change the game. Now, the big barrier to Black girls getting in gymnastics is not talent, it's money. It is so expensive. You know what I mean? And so, Simone Biles pretty much still by herself, but it's encouraging and it's inspiring. And hopefully it will inspire a generation of young African-American boys and girls who want to go into gymnastics.
Simone isn't just the best gymnastics person that has ever lived. She's one of the greatest athletes that has ever lived. So, we need to take that on and give her more credit than what we've done just because of what she's done gymnastically. Plus, the other thing that is concerning is that, this woman is near perfect in everything she has done. And they still complain and they want to find something wrong with her and criticize her. And, it's just a shame because it's not right. She's just, she's a wonderful human being. She sits down and talks to people and, she has worldly views. And, for her to be criticized the way she has been and not given the proper appreciation is a travesty.
Yeah, as you speak of criticism, Kevin, you make me think of the actual score that they gave her during the 2021 GKUS Classic competition. Rather, remember, this was her big return to competition since the 2019 World Championships. And after her completion of that, again, this move was never successfully completed by a woman prior to this competition until Simone did it. And they only gave her a 6.6. She didn't like that score, nor did her coaches or anyone else. They thought it was that she should have gotten something higher simply because of the level of difficulty. And I totally agree with that. It's completely difficult, especially when you have other men in gymnastics, other women in this sport of gymnastics who have come out to say, I can never do it. For her to do it, it's completely amazing. I totally agree that just from the simple fact that this particular skill was so difficult, she definitely should have received a higher score on it, but she didn't. And she took it with class. She went on and continued on and said it wasn't going to stop her. So kudos to Simone Biles. She is the GOAT. And I love the sparkled goat that she had on the back of her leotard. Moving on to another player here. Now in the NFL, say it ain't so. Julio Jones says he's ready to go. That's what my godmother says, ready to go. He's ready to get out of Atlanta. He's out of there. He appeared on Fox in an interview on Undisputed with Shannon Sharpe. Now, whether or not he knew he was on live television, that is up for debate. But while he was on that show, he says, I'm out of there. That's what he told Shannon Sharpe. He says, I ain't going to Dallas, man. I never thought about going to them. And Julio Jones is making it clear, in my opinion, that something has happened and is happening as it pertains to him and the Falcons. When you heard that he was out of there, meaning that he does not want to be in Atlanta anymore, AD, were you surprised?
No, because if you look at it now, he's 10, 11 years in his career. And again, we're talking about money. Atlanta has a serious cap problem. They have a couple rookie wide receivers, I believe. And so now they're moving forward and, he's just not in their plans anymore. Unfortunately, all of us get into this. We're employees when we work for somebody, all of us. And, many times we get our feelings hurt because we're expecting a gold watch and that ain't going to happen. The paycheck is a paycheck. And if you're honored at the end of your career, wherever you work and they give you accolades, that's a wonderful thing to have happen. But we all get our feelings hurt and we think about it. But, we're employees and that's how a lot of people look at us. And, for many of us, there's no gold watches.
Think about this. For the first time, maybe in this brother's life, he is no longer wanted. You know what I mean? And no matter how much money they got, how much status and notoriety, we got feelings. I know it hurt. I know it's hurts him and it's hurtful. That's why, I tell, all these brothers and sisters I've taught who play professionally, it is not a family. I remember the NFLPA president. What's the brother's name again? Oh man, what's that brother's name? Golly, I forgot that quick. DeMore Smith. He came down to Austin and we met. And he tells everybody who comes to NFL, don't believe this stuff about family. He said, if the owner or the GM comes to you talking about we are a family, we take care of each other, ask the GM or the owner, am I in your will? WILL, all right? Because he says that, they want brothers to take pay cuts, do all this stuff to make all these sacrifices for the organization. And you have to remind people that it is a business. It is transactional. And at a certain point, you will get walked up out of there.
Well, I think for me, him coming out and saying this on Undisputed just further solidified what I thought was happening. One, we don't know all of the conversations, all of the interactions that have been going on for years. But apparently, this particular relationship between Julio Jones and the Falcons has been crumbling for years now. And I think now it's just come out and it's really surfaced, and now it's just taken a full-fledged perspective into the forefront of things, particularly because of this interview. Now, I don't foresee Julio Jones being a part of the Falcons in 2021, being that he did request or ask to be traded months ago. But with him saying this and with him coming out about this, I think maybe his feelings could be hurt a little bit, like you said, AD, because there are other guys who they've brung into the mix who they're much younger than him. They are, granted, Julio Jones is not old. He's only 32, but still you got guys like Calvin Ridley, and then they just brung in somebody else like Kyle Pitts, where you had Matt Ryan, who was a little nervous because he thought potentially they could have drafted a quarterback, but then they bring in Kyle Pitts. What does it say like about Julio Jones and how he'll be utilized in the schemes and in the systems? But from the various talks and stuff like that I've heard from, different sources here in the Atlanta area, apparently this relationship has been on the rocks for quite some time now. And again, it's at the forefront. And I'm just curious as to who or where he will go. And I think a good person we should bring into this conversation is our guest for this evening, Mr. Jacques McClendon, who is the Director of Football Affairs with the Los Angeles Rams. His particular area, they lead and align player affairs and alumni affairs, and his department also oversees player integration into the overall organization strategy. And they also play a little role as it pertains to behavioral health for rookies, veterans, etc. So welcome, Mr. Jacques McClendon, to Fourth and Just Us. We thank you for joining us.
Appreciate y'all having me. Look forward to the dialogue, man. Big fan of you all.
Thank you. So we want to bring you into this conversation as it pertains to Julio Jones. Do you think his feelings are hurt? And could it be that it's because of some of the new guys that they're bringing in and surrounding him with? Maybe he feels as if he's now at a place, like Doc said, where he can be replaced for the first time in his life. Do you think that could be it?
Julio Jones is one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League, so I can't speak for him, but I'm sure he has full confidence in his abilities. And I think that at the end of the day, these things always figure their way out in the end. And I'm sure this was going to happen with this, but Julio Jones is an outstanding wide receiver and definitely one of the elite wide receivers in the National Football League.
Well, Jacques, let me ask you this. In your role, working in NFL, how do you handle it? Because you over player engagement, over football operations now. How do you handle it when young men get traded or men get cut? How do you, what do you feel like your responsibility is to that person?
I think it's the facilitation of dialogue. I think that, when you talk about the NFL and those key inflection moments, they're very, there's a lot of feelings that come into play. There's a lot of things that go with the change. And look, I think that's the one thing about the NFL is that change is inevitable. And so when you look at the rosters year to year, and then, I did a count the other day, with even within our roster, I think there's only, 7 players left from when I first got here in 2017, right? So it's one of the hardest parts of dealing with this league is the turnover. But I think one thing that, that we always operate here is that when you operate from a transformational standpoint, not just transactional, you're able to keep those relationships and, they last over a lifetime. I still talk to a bunch of the players that play with me and been through here throughout the trajectory of this journey. So I think it's all about the relationships and making sure that you're trying to be relational in the way that you operate. And I think that when you talk about facilitating that dialogue, it's knowing that, that it doesn't end when you don't wear a Rams jersey or the same jersey of the team you just played for. It's knowing that you always have that constant communication. So facilitating that dialogue and helping things land softly, I think definitely is part of that the transition.
Gotcha. Thanks, man. Mm-hmm.
Jacques, so now there's another issue that's dealing with the NFL, and it's with the Asian community. And lately, Eugene Chung has filed a discrimination suit against the NFL because they've deemed him as not being a minority. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I mean, I don't know where this is going to go, but I stand with the Asian community just like I stand with the Black community. Obviously, I haven't been in those shoes. I haven't looked through that lens, but I do know what it's like to be an underrepresented minority within this league. And I think that at the end of the day, we all got to pull together and push the needle forward, because there's a bunch of minorities that are waiting to get some of these opportunities that are more than ready and more than able to carry the lead and carry the torch to make sure they do just as good a job as everybody else. But we do need those opportunities.
Kevin, I'm gonna push back on that, man. I think the story was overblown. I don't think Asian Americans have the same history of oppression as Black people do. And I tell people, all oppression is not the same. You know what I'm saying? And I know people talking about, Asian American hate now, but you have to understand that the whole Asian American model minority myth that was invented by the New York Times in 1966 as a way to hold up the Asian American community to the Black community and say, look, we're not racist. Look at these Asians here. They are very successful. Asian Americans bought into that myth that they were the model minority, right? They keep their head down, go to school. I'm on a tangent, but let me finish, Lericia. A couple years ago, when the University of Texas defended race and admissions at the Supreme Court, all right? I was up there, had a chance to go. It was funny. I was sitting right behind Al Sharpton, and I was about 20 feet from Clarence Thomas and Justin Scalia. But anyway, here's the point. When I got out of the Uber that morning in front of the Supreme Court building, there was a large group of Asian Americans there, and the group was called Asians Against Affirmative Action, because they were the ones filing the cases that were saying these Ivy League institutions were discriminating against Asians by letting in unqualified Black people and Latin America and basically Mexican Americans. So, what has happened over the last couple months or so with some of the Trump rhetoric is disgraceful. But let's not make it seem as if the Asian American community has suffered the same level of discrimination and oppression as Black folks.
Is that the stance that you are trying to say, Jacques, or no?
You know what? That was a great take. But I would say this, right? I would say this. I think at the end of the day, for me, it comes down to, and this is just the way I operate. And one thing I don't do is speak for everybody. I speak for myself. I speak from a level of that. If I'm going to ask for that hand of help, I need to be willing to help others as well, because I do think that blessings are paid forward, and I can't say that I'm trying to move the needle or change the needle if I'm not looking to do the same for others. And so, the way I operate is that, I'm definitely one with the Black community, stand with the Black community, but I also want to help others on this journey to equality. Because at the end of the day, that's this mythical place we always talk about, but we're not there. We're not even close to there. We're at a place where it's about equity. And with that equity, we got to bring more opportunity and more processes to the table, have more equitable processes so minorities can start to gain some of these positions. So I'm with you, Doc. And the league is 65 to 70%.
I wasn't attacking against you, man. My frustration is with what's the Coaches Association, Kevin, out of Dallas. What's the brother's name? Remember they said they wanted to have a meeting with the commissioner and all that kind of stuff.
Not the AFCA.
No, the older group. Dang it, what's the name of that group? Jocks, you know them. They're advocating for Black coaches to get hired. They were involved in the Rooney Rule and all that kind of stuff. John Luke and all them. Yeah.
Okay. Fritz Paul and Alliance. Yep.
Yeah, Fritz Paul. Thanks, Jock. Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Well, I want to move to a situation that we've discussed on this show already, as it pertains to the racial divide in the NFL. And this goes to the race norming topic that we discussed on our show last week, where we know that a lot of the Black former athletes who have been fighting for just the simple fact of trying to receive an award as it pertains to the lawsuit that was filed and that was won on behalf of athletes. Well, it basically, with this particular issue, former Black athletes in essence have to prove that they are less than their white counterparts just in order for them to receive a reward. And this is all pertaining to, previous injuries, etc. When you heard about this particular issue and saw that, there was a foul or petitions being put out there, I believe there was one petition that had about 50,000 signatures or somewhere in that number. Jacques, what were your thoughts when you heard about this particular instance as it pertains to race norming in the NFL?
You know what? I was talking to Kevin and Doc before we got on the show. Like, I'm not so much. I don't so much know the details of this particular deal, but I will say this, right? I do think we got to live in a world where things will always come to the light, and there's some things in the history of this country that we're still overcoming to this day. And so, when you feel that you've been treated in such a way, you need that we got protocols and procedures in place where you can file those complaints and figure it out. But I can't speak on this one in depth as much as I was telling Doc and AD earlier. I don't know the particulars.
Jacques, it seems like you've transitioned out well, and I was at I think I mentioned earlier, I was spoke at an NFLPA gathering a few years ago in Indianapolis, and it was funny. The night before, they had a little happy hour, social hour. The brothers seemed fine. Then the next day, during this session, a lot of brothers seemed really, really broken. And the word they kept using, Jacques, was transition. For the men who transition out of the NFL well, all right? What are 3 of the 4 things that they do when you see them doing ABC 1, 2, 3? Okay, this guy is prepared for life after football. There are some things you can tell our audience that, athletes need to do as they begin to age in their career.
Yeah, and I mean, what a great question, Doc. And I think that what you see people that are seeking knowledge at all times, people that are leveraging their platform in positive ways for future and potential gain. And look, I think at the end of the day, we talk about this mythical word of transition. The transition starts as soon as you, get drafted or make an NFL roster. Average career is 3.5 years. The NFL as a player is an experience, not a career. A career is something that you can do until you're 6 foot under and retire at 65. That is not something that you can do as an NFL player. So I think that the successful ones you see know that, and they're able to leverage the now to create their later. Because at the end of the day, you have so much access as an NFL football player, NBA player, professional player in general. Like being able to open those doors and leverage those connections and gain your network while you're playing will help. There'll be no transition per se, right? Obviously, you'll miss the playing field, you'll miss playing, but you'll be able to develop that game plan because you're going to have people specifically pouring into you and mentors and a network and people to reach out to, outlets to have conversation with. Because I tell people that, when you talk about transition, it's just as important to know what you don't want to do than what you want to do. But you can't do that without seeking the information, making yourself vulnerable, and using your time wisely. Because when you get to this league, there's no more class. It's ball all day. And so there's a long off season. There's a lot of downtime. So what are you doing with that downtime? Are you strategically using it to make yourself the best person, the best player you can be? Or are you just, not using it wisely? So to me, the best characteristics of the people that I've seen as successful transitions, they understand it starts immediately when you get to the league. And so I think being ahead of it is the only way you're not behind it.
Jacques, I want to go back to something that you just said. And excuse me, Kevin, for cutting in here, but I feel like a lot of our young men, or a lot of just young men in general, don't look at the NFL that way. They don't look at it as an experience and not a career. How do we get the young men to look at it that way so that they are, like you said, in the off season or when they have that downtime, they are utilizing that time in the best possible way so that they can be prepared and be in that number of those who successfully transition?
Yeah, I had an interview this week talking about our some of the stuff we're doing with the Night Commission. I got asked the question, when did you have your first Black coach? And I told him I had my first Black head coach when I was drafted in 2010 to the Indianapolis Colts, and it was the consummate professional, outstanding man, Jim Caldwell. And then go fast forward 2 years later, I was doing an internship at the University of Maryland, and there was an unbelievable African-American male leading that place in Kevin Anderson. So you want to talk about in terms of how do we switch the needle? We have a representation problem. You see all the athletes playing the games, and you don't see any of the black males, females at the table in terms of being these top executives. And so I think that we got to shift the narrative to, yes, being an elite athlete is incredible, but also being an elite businesswoman, businessman as a black professional is also cool too. But until we get the representation better, and our young women and men are able to see that, we're still going to have the numbers skewed, because all they see is what they're doing on the playing field, not what they're doing to create the playing field. And so I think Doc said something earlier, like when the playing field is level, we will be able to overcome, but it's not right now. And I think that when you talk about being in these leadership roles at the executives at the NFL level, like my superiors, it'd be nice to see some more representation, because athletes would have something to strive for other than just being the athlete, right? They'd be able to know that they could cross over into these roles, whether they be sport, non-sport. I can't remember the bank. I think it was, don't quote me, was it Wells Fargo said that, there's a lack of talent in the black community, in the banking community. Well, I would challenge that person and say, no, you're just not looking in the right places. It's there. Right. And so we got to get to the point to where we're procuring these opportunities and being successful. Because I can tell you right now, I'll feel the burden every day I walk in that building to do right and do good, because I know that what I do will either make or break the opportunity for the next black professional that comes behind me. And so I wear that on my shoulder every day I go into work, and I feel like that I have to do good. So, one day somebody will gain opportunity because of me.
Young brother, I think that opportunity is going to come, and you'll be in that room one day. But thank you. The segue, I want to go into the Knight Commission, and particularly what you're doing and your role in the Knight position as one of the co-chairs, I believe. Can you talk a little bit about that? And it's quite impressive, because I thought you were the youngest ever, but you told me you're the third youngest ever. So share with that, and then I do have a follow-up question.
You know what? It's been very, very, as we talk about, shifting the needle, racial equity and moving forward. I've been, let's call it rest in peace, George Floyd. I know that we just passed the year. Rest in peace, Breonna Taylor, and all the other black lives taken in the past year and even longer before that. But what we have been able to do is make sure these lives, especially over the past year while we have these conversations, weren't lost without fruit. And I think that we're at a key inflection point in our country to where we're ready to have these tough conversations and tough actionability actions to move the needle forward. And I'm so optimistic of what we just came out with the Knight Commission and the support that we had with the committees in general to put out this report. Because at the end of the day, as Lynn Elmore, who leads our task force, says, we're at a place where we need to turn pledges into policy, right? So just as I said earlier, we got to create more equitable processes so we can have more equitable outcomes. I think that a lot of the times that we just scream that, we want change, but change has to come by systemically by creating opportunities and having accountability measures for them to happen. So, we're super excited, with this work. But one thing we know is that the work hasn't ended. It has just begun. And so as we publish this, we got to be ready to come in and continue to, like I said, make 2020 not a moment, but momentum forward. And so what are we going to do to continue that moment?
Well, one thing I know, we need your leadership on that commission and other places. And I had the experience, one of your committee members served on a diversity and inclusion committee with me on the NCAA. And so when we went and talked about it, we invited the NFL to come talk about the Rooney Rule and the aspects. Now, we knew that we couldn't do everything the Rooney Rule stood for, but there were some elements that would help the NCAA tremendously in their hiring approaches. And this committee member said, one, he didn't want to be influenced or sit down at the table and talk with billionaires because they had nothing in common. Well, first of all, any president, particularly in a Power Five, is running $1 billion corporation. So if there's not parallels, then you tell me what is. The other thing is that, he tried to say that there wasn't, it wasn't as bad as it seemed, and there wasn't any racism. happening in this area, which we all know is not true. So with your leadership and guidance, you can help some of these people through this that are serving on that committee with you.
You know what? We just gained a new member, Gloria Navarez from the WCC. And I think she just set an unbelievable precedent what can happen with the Bill Russell rule. And let's call it basically, it's a Rooney Rule-like mechanism that creates equitable processes. So we know that we get equitable representation in the interview process. Because I can promise you, just as Doc alluded to earlier, if we can get the right minorities, the right Black women and men at the table in these interviews, they will procure the jobs. But a lot of them don't even get the opportunity to talk to the right people to be able to procure them. And so I am unbelievably optimistic with what Mrs. Navarez did with the WCC, and I don't see why there's any reason now that there's precedent at the collegiate level that it can't be done across the board. So kudos to her, and I hope it's something that we see go across the entire NCAA landscape, because those are going to be the type of mechanisms and accountability tools that are going to help move the needle forward. And in regards to the Rooney Rule, you know, I think that we saw this past year, you know, when we had the attached draft picks, that there was an uptick in GM hires. There was an uptick in even the minority interviews, because now they have to do just more than one and have to have it. So I think that it's you know, it hasn't been perfect, but you know what? It's a step in the right direction in creating that opportunity. We just got to continue to get better. And, you know, like I said, you got to be super optimistic that people are willing to sit down and have the conversation, because I can promise from what it sounds like, you know, I wasn't old enough at the time, but 20 years ago, it seems like these conversations weren't even happening. So we got to continue to keep the foot on the gas, have the right conversations, and make sure we're going forward.
The unfortunate thing, Jacques, and this goes beyond the Knight Commission, NFL, is it seems like throughout all our history as Black folk, it takes a traumatic event, right, for things to happen. 1964, the whole Mississippi burning piece, those 3 civil rights workers get killed in the Delta, you get the Civil Rights Act. Bloody Sunday, 1965, Selma, they beat up on the bridge, Edmund Pettus Bridge, you get the Voting Rights Act, right? So it's like, why? And I'm not. It's not a question. It's just a statement. It seems like we only get stuff done. Doors only open after there has been trauma. For instance, if you saw the Birmingham clips with the German Shepherds and the fire hoses, you know what? That was all planned by MLK and others, because they knew they wanted to trigger a violent response, right, from the Birmingham police department. So then America would be embarrassed all over the globe. But my question is, what does it say about us in 2020 that the only way doors can open is if people get killed? I'm done, Lericia. I'm done.
I didn't know Jacques had a response to it. I didn't know Jacques had a response to your question.
I'll say this, Doc. It's unfortunate how we got here, but now that we're here, what are we going to do with it? And I refuse to let it be for bad. And I want to be one of the ones that are able to make sure that it wasn't for nothing. But I completely agree. It's a shame that it's taken us to get this an inflection point, but we're here. And I think that we got to continue to move the needle forward and push forward. But I'm right there with you, right? Like, I think it goes back to somebody as educated as yourself, right? Like, it comes to how come I'm just learning about the Tulsa massacre in 2020? Why is that not in my elementary book? Why am I not hearing about that? Why is Black History only a month? That's the shortest month of the year. How come I'm not hearing about that while I am in elementary, middle, high school? Why are we not having these conversations then? Well, I think that we got to figure out how can we be included in more conversations and normalize the history of oppression and what it's been. Because I feel like now we're just getting to this inflection point, and it's a lot at once. But I can tell you, I wish I was equipped at a younger age with more ammo. Because I promise you, I would have no doubt moved a lot differently had I been equipped.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, Gil Scott Heron was wrong about one thing. Now the revolution will be televised, and so with multimedia outlets and everything else. It's really hard for things to get by us now. Yeah. But, the thing is we need to be positive about what we're trying to do. And, Doc, you and I talked about this all the time. Donald Trump raised an awareness in our community that we thought might have been gone or wasn't as bad as it was. And we've seen that through the vote, 50% of America is racist or support racist people. So, I mean, that's where we are right now.
That's where we are, but the Knight Commission, they're doing things as it pertains to intercollegiate athletics to try to move the needle, as Jacques has mentioned. And what sparked my interest about the Knight Commission is something that you all released recently, where it says you all plan to create racial equity for Black college athletes. And basically, you're taking the decisive action to address systemic policies and practices that create barriers to success of Black college athletes. There were a few points that you all mentioned in this article. And again, it all sparked my interest, but two that stood out were the holding the institutions accountable in recruitment and hiring, which you sort of touched on as it pertains to representation here in your previous statements, and also creating more equitable opportunities for the Black college athletes to assume leadership roles. I know you all had a discussion about this earlier this week. Can you talk a little bit more about this particular aspect or this particular plan and what things are in place to ensure that all of this happens?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that one thing that we've seen over the past, let's call it 6 months, when you're talking about Deion Sanders taking over at Jackson State, Eddie George taking over at Tennessee State, there is a business case to tell the Black story. And so with that increased visibility becomes increased opportunity. And, one thing we've talked about in our report is even from the accountability measures that the student athletes are held to may not be fair to their situations currently that they are at their institution. So how can we create more equitable policies that allow these institutions to not fall into such downfalls from an academic standpoint when they're really serving the community that they are, to the best of their ability. And what we're not trying to do or talk about is, water down the academic experience. No. We're saying make it a more equitable experience because everybody's journey is different. How the populations that they serve are different. So for us to say that it's just level across the board and the same everywhere is just not a realistic trajectory. So, those are some of the things we're talking about is how can we, get adoption of some policies to make these to make this journey more equitable for the Black student athlete, especially at the HBCUs.
Well, I'm glad you opened that door. But before we let you go here, Jacques, gotta ask you, man. We've talked about this on the show before too. We've seen guys like Eddie George getting the job. Deion Sanders got the job over at HBCUs. Is this the route to go? Bringing in certain celebrity figures, former NFL players, and putting them in these head coaching positions. We've had this debate. You opened that door. So now I got to ask you, is this the right way to go?
Yeah, oh, so it's a debate. It's early, right? So TBD. But it's and what I will say, what's super exciting about it is to see the ESPN coverage, to see the visibility, to see the resources being brought to these schools. Like, I love it from that aspect, but will a coach be successful? Will they stay there 5 or 6 years? We won't know until we move the needle forward and look back. But I will say the excitement is great. And I can promise you I was watching a bunch of the spring season from the HBCU because they were given that visibility and platform.
Did you watch the
SWAC
championship?
Don't get me started. Don't get me started tonight.
You said you were done, Doc.
I got a degree from Jackson State. I tell folks, don't get me started tonight.
Well, Jacques, we greatly appreciate your time with us here on the show, your insight, your feedback on the various questions and the discussions that we had. We greatly appreciate it. All the best to you. Thank you for joining us on 4th and Just Us.
Appreciate you. Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks, brother.
So much insight coming from Jacques McClendon, who, again, is the Director of Football Affairs with the Los Angeles Rams. Greatly appreciate him joining the show today. It's almost time for us to head out of here, but we always have to answer or end with a solution if we have one. And today's topic for the show is, does the NFL have a race problem? So the question is, where do we go from here now, guys? How do we, again, push the needle forward, as Jacques mentioned several times earlier? How do we move forward as it pertains to the race issue that we've seen in the NFL? AD?
Well, I believe with Jacques' leadership and other people like him that are in those positions, they're going to have to push it from within, and then you have to keep the pressure from the outside too. So, it's commendable, and it's revigorating that we have young people like Jacques in these roles, and just hopefully they'll get the opportunity and they'll get mentored to be the GMs and a president. And, the other thing we need to look at is when are we going to have Black ownership? I think, that's a key thing. You have a Black owner at the table talking to his or her counterparts. I mean, that's going to go a long way too. So I think that's all in the equation.
Well, I mean, there were rumors that came out today, rumors that Jay-Z could be trying to put his name in the hat for some sort of ownership with the Washington football team. So that could be a step in the right direction, don't you think?
No,
absolutely.
No.
Oh, Doc says no. Wait a minute. Why, Doc?
Here's the question. Lericia. How come we always have to go to the entertainer piece? There is not another, I don't know of a white entertainer who owns the NFL or NBA franchise. Why can't you just go to a Black business? Why do we always have to go to the entertainment card? And to me, Robert Smith lived right here in Austin, the wealthiest African-American in the country. Got a bunch of wealthy people, but we always allowed him to go to that entertainer card. And so, Kevin, if it happens, it happens. But I think you got some other folk out there who should be at the front of the line more so than Jay-Z.
Well, Doc, we got to let you go ahead and answer the question, where do we go from here as it pertains to race in the NFL? I'm encouraged by people like Jacques, his generation. I've been, fighting a lot of these battles, 23, 24 years, particularly at the college level. And it seemed as if the people in my generation and slightly younger didn't have much of a social or racial conscience. But I'm optimistic that people in Jacques' generation, they understand that they can be an advocate for social justice. They can be a team player. They can contribute to the culture and move things forward. So, like Kevin said, it'll be great to see people like Jacques and some of his peers, men and women in his age group, getting some of these leadership positions. And I think they won't be afraid to push the needle and bring about real change. Your final thoughts, AD?
It's just a matter of staying with the process and developing people and pushing it, and knocking on the door. And sometimes you got to force yourself in the door. And I think that, with people like Jacques and other folks behind him, we will see change. But the only thing that, I'm going to go back to talking about, if you own something, then you have a bigger stake and you have a bigger voice at the table.
Understood. Doc, your final thoughts? Well,
I've spoken enough today, huh? I am about to go to the airport and pick up my nephew and his 3 boys. One is 5. I'm watching a 6-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-month-old for the next 5 or 6 days. So that's what I'm excited about, Lericia.
By yourself?
No, my wife said not by myself. We're gonna play zone coverage, but we're excited about it.
Well, I'm excited for you all too. I am going to go make myself a nice hot cup of tea, because my sinuses are really bothering me. So I apologize if I sound very nasally today.
Lericia, I love it. I love that.
Here in the Atlanta area, it says that the air quality was very unhealthy today, and I think my sinuses definitely took notice. And so we are going to go get us a nice cup of tea here and try to settle down these sinuses. But we thank you all for joining us on Fourth and Just Us again. Remember to like us if you're on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you missed the show, it's okay. You can always go back and rewatch it on both of those platforms. But we hope to see you all again next Wednesday, same place, same time. Again, this is Fourth and Just Us. Thank you for watching.
Happy birthday.